The year 1945 would forever alter the destiny of Japan. A nation that had only yesterday dreamed of dominion over Asia now lay in ruins, scorched by American fire. The Imperial Army, once the terror of its neighbors, had ceased to exist with the stroke of a pen aboard the battleship Missouri. But the deepest humiliation was yet to come. Now, their own homeland would be defended by foreign tanks, bearing white stars on their arms. No one could have predicted that in just 20 years, this trampled nation would create a fighting machine so advanced, its capabilities would send a chill through the Soviet High Command. The American occupation lasted until 1952. For 7 long years, Japan was forbidden from possessing its own military. Its new constitution, written under Washington's dictation, forever renounced war as an instrument of state policy. But the Cold War had its own unforgiving logic. When North Korean T-34 tanks crossed the 38th parallel in June of 1950, the Americans understood they needed a reliable ally in the region. That ally would be their recently vanquished foe. By 1954, the Japan Self-Defense Forces were born, an army that, formally, was not an army at all. America generously supplied its new partner. Japanese crews soon found themselves commanding several hundred M24 Chaffee light tanks and around 250 M4A3E8 Shermans. These were proven machines, veterans of the Second World War, reliable, rugged. For a country that had fought with outdated, thinly armored vehicles, it seemed more than enough. But the Japanese military quickly discovered a fundamental problem. Their country was not the rolling plains of Europe or the prairies of America. The Japanese islands are 80% mountain, a rugged landscape of deep gorges and winding river valleys. The Shermans, which had performed so brilliantly in Normandy, here became unwieldy turtles. They bogged down on steep inclines, struggled on narrow mountain roads, and could not bring their firepower to bear in the harsh terrain. The situation was most critical on Hokkaido, the northernmost main island, where a Soviet invasion was considered a terrifyingly real possibility. The lighter Chafees, with their lower weight and superior suspension, handled the Japanese geography far better. Their crews grew to love them for their agility. And yet, the war in Korea had taught a brutal lesson. The Chaffee's 75mm gun was tragically ineffective against the Soviet T-34-85. American tankers had paid a horrific price for this discovery in the first months of that conflict. The Japanese studied this experience intently, and they knew they needed something entirely new. And so, from necessity, a uniquely Japanese tank doctrine was forged. A machine had to be light enough to conquer the mountains, but powerful enough to face the bear. It was a challenge born not from a desire for conquest, but from the quiet, desperate need for survival in a world that had already burned them once. In the shadow of a colossal new world order, the islands of Japan faced a unique and daunting challenge. A nation reborn from ashes, now staring across the sea at the ever-expanding might of the Soviet Union. The defense of its homeland was not a question of open plains and grand armored clashes, but of a landscape defined by nature itself. A land of steep mountain passes that choked invading armies, and a near infinite number of rivers that sliced the terrain into a tactical puzzle. Any armored vehicle designed for this world had to be a paradox. Light enough to navigate this intricate geography, to cross bridges never meant for the weight of war, yet powerful enough to confront and destroy the formidable medium and heavy tanks of the Soviet arsenal. Japanese designers looked west to their European counterparts for inspiration. A philosophical revolution was underway in tank design. In Germany, engineers were perfecting the Leopard 1. In France, the workshops were giving birth to the AMX-30. Both machines were born from a stark, almost brutal realization. In the new age of sophisticated anti-tank guided missiles, heavy armor had, in many ways, lost its meaning. It could no longer guarantee survival. The new doctrine, therefore, championed speed, agility, and overwhelming firepower. Make the tank a rapier, not a shield. This philosophy resonated deeply in Tokyo, but with a uniquely Japanese addition. Their machine would not only be fast and lethal, it would possess the ability to fight in the mountains in a way no other tank in the world could even comprehend. Their first foray into this new era was the Type 61, officially accepted into service in 1961. It was an honest, earnest attempt to forge a domestic machine. It carried a 90mm cannon and kept its weight to a relatively nimble 35 tons. For a design conceived in the 1950s, it was a perfectly respectable tank. The problem, however, was time. Its development had been a long, arduous process. By the moment the first production models rolled off the assembly line, the Soviet tank armies were already fielding the ubiquitous T-55 and were preparing for the mass introduction of the T-62 with its powerful smoothbore gun. The Japanese machine was a ghost, obsolete before it ever had a chance to cast a shadow. The military command understood this with chilling clarity. So it was that in 1965, a remarkably bold decision was made. There would be no incremental modernizations of the aging Type 61, no simple upgrades. They demanded a completely new machine from the ground up. There were voices of caution, of course. Those who proposed the simpler path. Just mount a more powerful 105mm gun onto the old chassis and call it a day. But the engineers knew. They understood that such a cosmetic repair would be a fatal miscalculation. The Soviet Union was building its armored might with a speed that was, frankly, terrifying. To counter such a threat, Japan needed something not just better, but truly revolutionary. Work on the individual components of this future tank had already begun, quietly, in the early 1960s. The Japanese approached the problem with a methodical patience, a characteristic befitting a nation that has elevated perseverance to a virtue. They did not try to build the entire tank at once. Instead, they focused their genius on three key independent elements that would ultimately converge to create their masterpiece. The first was a hydropneumatic suspension system, a concept they began exploring as early as 1961. The second was a powerful, compact engine capable of producing 700 horsepower, a goal they aimed to achieve by March of 1965. The third and final piece was the weapon itself, a Japanese-produced version of the formidable 105mm rifled cannon, with trials scheduled between 1966 and 1967. It was the suspension, however, that would become the true calling card of Japanese tank design. The idea was at once simple and breathtakingly brilliant. A conventional tank has a fixed ground clearance, a set distance from the earth to its hull. It cannot crouch to reduce its silhouette in an ambush. It cannot lean forward or backward to increase the precious degrees of its gun's elevation or depression when firing from a slope. Japanese engineers decided to shatter this limitation. Their suspension allowed the height of each individual road wheel to be adjusted independently. The tank could literally breathe. It could squat down, hugging the ground to become a smaller target. It could rise up on its haunches to peer over an obstacle. It could kneel, tilting its entire hull forward or back, giving its gunner an impossible advantage in the unforgiving verticality of mountain warfare. It was no longer just a machine of steel and fire. It was an extension of the very landscape it was born to defend. It possessed a truly uncanny ability. The hull could tilt forward and back, and even to the side, as if offering a silent mechanical bow to an unseen dignitary. To test this revolutionary system, engineers turned to the chassis of a known quantity, the Type 60 self-propelled gun. This humble platform would become the cradle for a technology that would define a generation of armor. The experiments stretched into years, for the mechanism proved to be a labyrinth of engineering complexity. The hydropneumatics demanded microscopic precision in their settings, absolutely reliable seals, and immensely powerful pumps. The slightest, most insignificant leak of fluid, a single weeping gasket, could render the entire system inert at the most critical moment imaginable on a battlefield. Yet the Japanese engineers stubbornly refined the design, fully understanding the profound tactical advantages it would grant them in the nation's rugged, mountainous terrain. With the main armament, the story becomes particularly contentious. Many Western sources, even today, assert that the Japanese simply copied the famed British L7 cannon, the ubiquitous gun that armed the majority of NATO tanks at the time. This, however, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the engineering involved. It is true that the Japanese cannon utilized a barrel compatible with the L7, a pragmatic choice allowing for the use of standard NATO ammunition. But the breech block, the recoil management system, and the counter-recoil devices were entirely indigenous designs. In its core construction, the Japanese gun bore a closer resemblance to the American M68 than to its supposed British original. This was a matter of principle for Japan's burgeoning defense industry. They were determined to prove that they were capable of creating advanced weaponry from the ground up, not merely assembling the designs of others under license. It was a declaration of technological sovereignty. By 1966, the gun was mounted in a specially designed narrow turret, and the firing trials began. The results exceeded all expectations. The cannon was precise, its groupings tight, and a thoughtfully engineered loading system allowed the crew to maintain a high and punishing rate of fire. But Japanese engineers were not content to stop there. They equipped the weapon with the most advanced systems of the day, a laser rangefinder and a ballistic computer. The tank gunner no longer needed to estimate the distance to a target by eye, no longer had to manually introduce corrections for wind and movement. The electronics did it all for him, multiplying the probability of a first-round hit exponentially. In parallel, work was underway on the power plant. The Mitsubishi Corporation created a 10-cylinder, air-cooled diesel engine with a turbocharger. It was a formidable two-stroke motor, with a working volume of 21.5 liters, unleashing 750 horsepower. For a tank weighing approximately 40 tons, this provided an excellent power-to-weight ratio and, consequently, superb mobility. The target maximum speed on paved roads was set at 53 kilometers per hour, a truly respectable figure for the air. By the end of the 1960s, all the key components were ready. The time had come to assemble the beast. First, the Japanese built a 35-ton test rig, designated the STT, upon which they perfected the complex interplay between the suspension and no longer mere test beds. They carried the full complement of armament and equipment, allowing engineers to finally assess the combat potential of their creation in conditions as close to reality as possible. Here, in the steel of these prototypes, was the culmination of a decade of relentless effort. It was more than a weapon. It was a quiet, powerful statement, a machine born not of imitation, but of a nation's fierce ambition to forge its own path. The prototypes emerged from the workshops exactly as their Japanese engineers had envisioned them. The STB, a machine born not of grand imperial ambition, but of quiet, calculated necessity. Its combat mass settled at 38 tons, heavy enough to carry serious protection, yet light enough to navigate the capricious, often unforgiving Japanese terrain. Inside its steel shell, a crew of 4 would fight: commander, gunner, loader, and driver. A classic, proven arrangement. For its hide, they chose rolled steel armor for both the hull and the turret, a deliberate rejection of the era's nascent experiments with composite materials. The reasoning was rooted in a grim, pragmatic theory then gaining traction across the globe. In an age of guided anti-tank missiles, it was believed that any armor, no matter how thick, could eventually be pierced. Therefore, the wisest investment was not in static defense, but in mobility and firepower. The ability to strike first and disappear. This did not mean, however, that the tank's protection was merely symbolic. The frontal arc of the turret sides were sheathed in 110 millimeters, tapering to 60 at the rear. Even the roof, so often neglected, was protected by a 40-millimeter plate of steel. The hull was more modestly armored, with its sides and rear ranging from 25 to 35 millimeters. This distribution was no accident. It was a physical manifestation of Japanese tactics. This was a tank designed to fight from ambush, to use the folds of the earth as its primary shield, exposing only the formidable face of its turret to the enemy. And it was here, in the dance between terrain and machine, that the tank's revolutionary heart was revealed: its hydro-pneumatic suspension. This was the very feature for which the entire project had been conceived. The vehicle's standard ground clearance was 400 millimeters, but the crew could adjust it on the fly, raising or lowering it by 200 millimeters in either direction. The tank could exhale, pressing itself to the earth to shrink its silhouette, or rise on its haunches to clear a difficult obstacle. But its true genius lay elsewhere. Because the suspension of each side could be adjusted independently, the entire machine could tilt. It could kneel forward, incline backward, or lean to one side. A conventional tank's main gun might have a fixed depression of, say, -6 degrees and an elevation of +9. These were immutable laws, dictated by the geometry of the turret ring and breech. But the STB could rewrite those laws. By tilting its entire hull forward, the gunner could achieve a staggering -12 degrees of depression. By leaning back, the gun could be raised to +15 degrees. On the battlefield, this translated into a lethal advantage. The STB could take a position on the reverse slope of a hill, a place where no conventional tank could fight. It would creep forward until only the very top of its turret and its cannon cleared the crest. Tilting the hull forward, it gained those precious extra degrees of depression needed to engage targets in the valley below, while remaining almost completely invisible. After the shot was fired, the machine would simply roll back, vanishing completely behind the hill. For a Soviet tanker, trained in the blunt, overwhelming tactics of the armored blow, and dissolved back into the landscape. Its mobility was further enhanced by its wide 550-millimeter tracks, which gave it exceptionally low ground pressure. The tank moved with confidence across rice paddies, sandy beaches, and marshlands where heavier, foreign machines would inevitably bog down. For an island nation laced with countless rivers and streams, this was a critical capability. The STB was a creature perfectly, beautifully adapted to its environment. It was not just a weapon of war. It was a reflection of a philosophy, a belief that victory belongs not always to the strongest, but to the one who best understands the ground beneath their feet. It was a machine engineered for the deep, equipped for submerged operations, capable of crossing riverbeds where others would falter. Within its steel hide, a formidable arsenal lay in wait. The combat load was an impressive 50 rounds, a testament to the designer's intent for sustained battle. The internal architecture was a masterclass in lethal efficiency. 28 shells were methodically arranged in the forward section of the hull. 7 more were nestled beneath the floor of the fighting compartment, while another 9 occupied the turret's rear bus. But the true innovation was a special device, a mechanized drum-type stowage designed to assist the loader. This held a further 6 rounds, ready to be fed directly to the cannon's breech. With this system engaged, the tank could unleash a furious volley, a shot every 4 seconds, a relentless rhythm of destruction that would continue until the drum was empty. After that initial storm of fire, the pace would inevitably slow. The rate of fire would fall, and the loader, his mechanical assistant now spent, would have to rely on raw muscle and training, manhandling the heavy shells into place by hand. The ammunition itself was a carefully curated selection, a tool for every conceivable task on the modern battlefield. For confronting enemy armor, there were the L-28A1 armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot rounds. These were the tank's rapiers, purchased from Great Britain, capable of punching through 240 millimeters of steel armor at a distance of 1 kilometer. For shattering fortifications and erasing resistance, the crew could call upon the Type 91 high-explosive anti-tank shells, or the Type 75 high-explosive squash head rounds. These were produced domestically in Japan, built under an American license as an analog to the formidable M393 shell. The fire control system was the machine's predatory soul. It integrated an optical sight with variable magnification, a laser rangefinder, and a ballistic computer. The commander, from his own panoramic cupola, with its sweeping all-around view, could designate targets. The gunner received the distance data automatically, a pulse of light providing a precise measurement in an instant. The computer then took over, calculating the myriad of tiny adjustments needed for wind, temperature, and target motion. For combat after dark, the tank was fitted with infrared observation and aiming devices, technology that, in the 1960s, was considered the very pinnacle of military science. The trials of the prototypes were a crucible of creation, stretching on for several years. The Japanese engineers were famously meticulous. Every weld, every circuit, every single bolt was subjected to relentless scrutiny as they sought out weak points and introduced modifications to the design. In total, 6 prototypes of the STB series were constructed, and each successive vehicle was a distinct evolution from its predecessor, incorporating dozens of improvements born from punishing tests. Then, in 1972, one of the prototypes was finally revealed to the wider public. For a population accustomed to the angular, utilitarian silhouettes of American Shermans and Pattons, the sight was breathtaking. They stood in stunned admiration. This new tank was radically different from anything they had ever seen. A streamlined turret with fluid contours, a low-slung, predatory silhouette, and swift, aggressive lines across the hull. The machine looked as if it had driven directly off the pages of a science fiction novel. Newspapers scrambled to proclaim it a technical triumph for Japanese industry, while military experts noted the profound thoughtfulness invested in every single detail. However, the path from a celebrated prototype to a reliable production machine proved to be a thorny one. The engineers encountered an unpleasant surprise. The engine, which had performed flawlessly on the test grounds, began to act capriciously under the strain of intensive, sustained operation. 750 horsepower, it turned out, was simply too much for the transmission to handle. Key components were failing under the immense load. After long and difficult deliberation, a pragmatic decision was made. The engine's power would be reduced to 720 horsepower. This new version, designated the 10ZF22WT, offered far greater reliability for only a marginal loss in dynamic performance. It was a quiet, profound lesson in the realities of engineering, a testament not to the blind pursuit of ultimate power, but to the more arduous, more noble pursuit of perfect harmony. The ideal is a merciless thing. It exists only on paper, a perfect machine of war, flawless and absolute. But reality always demands its price. And for the engineers of Japan's next-generation battle tank, that price was paid in sacrifice. Piece by piece, the dream was dismantled by the cold logic of pragmatism. The first casualty was its rhythm. A revolutionary loading assistance device, a mechanism that promised a relentless tempo of fire every 4 seconds, was judged too complex, too extravagantly expensive for mass production. It was excised from the final design, and the immense, repetitive burden of heaving high-explosive shells was placed squarely back onto the shoulders of a human loader. The metronome of automated warfare fell silent, replaced by the strain of flesh and bone. Next, the machine's eyes in the sky were blinded. A remotely operated anti-aircraft machine gun designed a crew's ability to defend itself from aerial threat. Where several reverse gears offered tactical flexibility, now there was only one. A small retreat, perhaps, but each of these decisions was a source of profound pain for the engineers who had conceived of something greater. There was, however, no alternative. The tank was already becoming a machine of unthinkable cost. In 1973, the modified project, born from the final prototype known as STB-6, was finally presented for approval. The military leadership gave its assent. The machine was officially accepted into service under the designation Type 74. And it was here, at the moment of its birth, that a truly bizarre episode unfolded. One still recounted with a shake of the head in Japanese military circles. The Minister of Defense, the man occupying the office at that precise moment, suddenly demanded the tank be named after him. This official had not the slightest connection to its development. He had not participated in the grueling trials, nor had he funded the project from his own pocket. He simply decided that for the sake of history, the nation's newest armored weapon should carry his family name into posterity. The engineers, men who had poured more than a decade of their lives into every bolt and circuit board, were incandescent with a quiet, disciplined fury. Fortunately, this absurd flight of vanity found no support, and the tank retained its elegantly impersonal designation. Serial production finally began at the vast facilities of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in 1975. The assembly of a single Type 74 was not a matter of days or weeks, but months. It was a process that demanded the highest caliber of skilled labor, a ballet of precision engineering. Each vehicle was, in effect, assembled by hand, with every component meticulously fitted and calibrated. The hydro-pneumatic suspension, the tank's signature feature allowing it to kneel and lean, required an almost religious devotion to detail. The slightest defect, a microscopic imperfection, could lead to a catastrophic failure of the entire system. Quality control was unprecedented, even by Japan's own legendary standards. All of this, of course, was reflected in the final cost. The Type 74 cost the national treasury an astronomical sum, a figure that dwarfed its Western counterparts. For comparison, the German Leopard 1, a superb tank in its own right, was significantly cheaper and was being produced by the thousand. The Japanese, by contrast, could only afford to manufacture a few dozen of their machines each year. Critics in the Diet demanded explanations, asking why the nation was hemorrhaging money on a domestic tank when they could simply purchase proven technology from their allies. The military's response was unwavering. A sovereign tank industry was not a luxury, but a non-negotiable matter of national security and technological independence. Production continued for 13 years, ending in 1988. Over that time, 893 tanks rolled off the assembly line. It is a number that might seem modest by the standards of continental superpowers, but for the island nation of Japan, it was a formidable arsenal. This, however, created its own logical paradox. A question began to form in the minds of strategists. Where, in a country defined by mountains and sprawling urban centers, does one station nearly 900 heavy fighting vehicles? The answer, when it came, was a testament to the unique pressures that shaped the destiny of a nation. The new tanks were methodically dispersed across the nation's strategic heartlands, the 4 main islands of the Japanese archipelago. A particular concentration of this steel was garrisoned on Hokkaido, where the cold northern winds carried more than just sea spray. Here, the specter of a Soviet invasion was not a distant political theory, but a palpable geographic reality. Yet, the quiet satisfaction of completing a landmark national defense program was soon poisoned by a deeply unsettling awareness. By the very moment the last Type 74 rolled off the factory floor, it was already a relic, a ghost of a bygone era. Across the sea, the Soviet Union was churning out its T-72 tanks by the thousand, steel behemoths armed with a fearsome 125mm main gun and shielded by revolutionary composite armor. The Japanese machine's 100mm cannon, once a source of pride, now struggled to make even a dent in the frontal aspect of these new monsters. Meanwhile, Soviet shells were calculated to slice through the Type 74's conventional steel hide as if it were barely there. History, it seemed, was repeating its cruelest lesson. Once again, Japan's defenders were being handed a weapon that was already obsolete. But the Japanese self-defense forces refused to simply accept this dangerous deficit. A sweeping, ambitious modernization program was launched, a testament to a refusal to fall behind. The first 400 machines to leave the assembly line were designated the base model. They were Spartan, carrying only standard equipment with no enhancements, their hulls painted in a single, monotonous shade of khaki. The next iteration, the Model B, represented the first crucial step forward. It received a sophisticated, upgraded fire control system. The true innovation, however, was its newfound ability to fire armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot rounds. These advanced projectiles, slender darts of tungsten, flew far faster and struck with immensely greater force than the older, spinning core ammunition, offering a glimmer of hope against the dull khaki for a new, complex camouflage pattern. This might seem a trivial detail, but on the broken, verdant terrain of the Japanese islands, the right camouflage could mean the difference between life and death for a crew. Three-tone swaths of green and brown broke up the tank's silhouette, making it profoundly difficult to spot from the air or at a distance. The Model G brought with it more substantial, more fundamental changes. The long barrel of the main gun was fitted with a thermal sleeve. This insulated jacket protected the metal from the subtle warping caused by uneven heating, whether from the sun's rays or a sudden downpour of rain. Without it, the barrel could bend by a fraction of a millimeter, an imperceptible distortion that could send a shell veering wildly off target over a long range. After the sleeve was installed, the tank's accuracy improved dramatically. In time, every one of the earlier models was painstakingly retrofitted to the Model G standard, forging a far more homogeneous and capable fleet. But the engineers were far from finished. The subsequent modifications, D, E, and F, introduced a cascade of increasingly serious enhancements. Mine plows were fitted to the hulls, allowing them to carve a safe path through heavily mined terrain. A new generation of night vision devices gave crews the ability to fight effectively in the pitch black of night. On the turret's flanks, smoke grenade launchers appeared, capable of instantly throwing set armor skirts, designed to prematurely detonate the shaped charges of anti-tank rockets before they could reach the main hull. The Model F was intended to be the ultimate expression of the design, the pinnacle of its evolution, with engineers planning to install an entirely new... The story of the Type 74 is not one of a perfect machine, but of a persistent, unyielding spirit of adaptation. It is a chronicle of a nation facing a terrifying reality and responding not with despair, but with relentless ingenuity, turning a flawed warrior into a worthy guardian, one modification at a time. The upgrades were meant to grant the old warrior new eyes. A sophisticated fire control system, paired with a thermal sight, capable of piercing the veil of smoke, fog, and the deepest night, hunting for the heat signature of an enemy. To compensate for its aging, inadequate armor, a new skin of dynamic protection was conceived, a reactive shield designed to detonate incoming shells before they could strike true. But in the end, only 4 such machines were ever completed. The cold calculations of logistics and finance delivered a final, killing blow. The cost to modernize the entire fleet would be nearly as much as designing and building an entirely new tank from the ground up. The program was quietly shelved, deemed economically senseless. By then, work on its successor was already well underway. The new program, designated TK-X, had begun in the mid-1970s, almost immediately after the Type 74 was officially accepted into service. The Japanese designers had learned a hard lesson. They understood that the next tank had to be engineered with a vision for the decades to come, not just the threats of the present. The result was the Type 90. It was a formidable machine, armed with a 120mm cannon and clad in advanced composite armor, a true peer to the finest Western designs of its era. The first production tanks rolled into their motor pools in 1990. And then, just 1 year later, an event occurred that fundamentally reshaped the entire global order. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. The existential threat of an invasion of Hokkaido, the very reason for the existence of these steel behemoths, vanished overnight. The thousands of Soviet tanks Japan had prepared to fight were now rusting in storage depots or being sold for pennies to third world nations. The Cold War had ended without a single shot fired between the superpowers. And so, the Type 74 never truly entered the crucible of combat. These tanks never fired upon a living enemy, never charged across a battlefield, never repelled an enemy onslaught. Their entire service life was a relentless cycle of training exercises, punctuated by occasional demonstrations for journalists, showing off the signature bow of their hydraulic suspension. The machines grew old. They broke down, were written off, and consigned to storage, replaced by the newer Type 10 tanks and the wheeled Type 16 tank destroyer. Today, a few dozen Type 74s are still listed on active rolls, living out the final years of their service. Their crews are not the hardened tankers who once drilled to repel a Soviet invasion, but a new generation of soldiers for whom the Cold War is little more than a paragraph in a history textbook. Soon, the last of these machines will be sent to the scrapyard to be melted down, or will find a final resting place as a silent gate guard at the entrance to a military base. A curious legacy for a tank that took 20 years to create, only to become obsolete before it ever truly left the factory floor. A sentinel built for a war that, thankfully, never came.